Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, this is Zoe, your friendly neighborhood Canadian-Australian leadership expert, where I work with team members and team leaders so that they can work better together. We have a really fun interview for you today. And if you've ever asked the question, how can I make all this tech stuff work for me? And what does it mean for the implications of culture? And how do I connect better with different generations? Well, those are just some of the questions we answer in today's interview. My guest today is Dr. Rick Chromey. He is a best-selling author, international speaker, a cultural historian, and leadership professor. He is the founder-president of Mana Educational Services International. He has also recently published his wonderful book, Gen Tech, An American Story of Technology, Change, and Who We Really Are. So he redefines how we look at generations and how technology shapes our communication and connection with others. And in our conversation, we go well into the tech, the future of technology, what this means for relationships and growth, the risks and opportunities around it, as well as coming back to what we can do as leaders right now to take advantage of technology and to really build cultures that are worth belonging to. So without further ado, let's get into it. Woohoo! All the way from Boise, Idaho. Welcome to the show, Rick Chromey.
Thank you, Zoe. What a great introduction there.
Short and sweet.
We're all wound up here. Let's go.
Yeah, it's afternoon for you and morning for me, where I've just kind of scrubbed my eyes open and had a shower and off we go. It's a great way to start the morning.
Me too. I just got out of the shower too.
It's probably too much information for everyone.
Probably, yeah. We've lost half the podcast audience in the first minute.
Yeah, that's right. They're like, oh, naked people. Like, this is not what I signed up for. We're here to talk about leadership and generations and that kind of stuff. So let's rewind the clock a little bit. And I always am curious how people ended up becoming experts in their field, because none of us sort of launch into what we're doing now. And particularly with your focus on technology and generations and leadership, that's an interesting intersection. How did you end up here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have a hard time believing I'm an expert in anything. To me, expert means a former drip under pressure. So, it's not necessarily when you tear apart the word. In fact, I really believe that the secret to life and all is to spend 80% of your time learning and maybe 15, 20% of your time teaching, and the rest just show up and be a good person. But in general, I'll let other people call me an expert. As far as the generations and technology and this work, I've been probably doing this work almost 40 years. I was started out as a youth pastor in a local church up here in the States. And it just over time, I started doing a lot of talking on just generations, understanding at that time it was the millennial generation, as they're commonly called, and just understanding that 1980s, 1990s generation. And then later Gen Z comes along, and that's really what provoked a lot of my writing on generations, is because I just don't agree with the Gen Z tag. I think it's a lazy label. And in the process of trying to understand it more, and I do a lot of cultural technology theory and such, I realized that our generationally, we tend to have windows of technology that we operate through. And so we're more of a television generation than a boomer generation, as they're often known, or instead of Gen X, where I tend to land, we're more of a cable television video game type of generation. And those millennials, they're more like, cell phones and personal computers and internet generation. So the technology is probably a better frame for just looking at generations today. It might be a little bit different in Australia, but in general, I find that when I have these conversations internationally, that a lot of them can really relate because the generations are popping and the technology is popping about the same time.
Yeah, I think it's a fresh and interesting look at what does actually shape a generation in terms of outlook and viewpoint and beliefs and values. And so when I saw the outline of your premise around redefining generations based on the predominant technology, I thought, that's really, really interesting. So having mapped it out, so you've mapped out, boomers is not really like, instead of defining when people were born and how old they were, you talk about the dominant tech at the time. What do you think are the biggest differences across the different types of generations because of these different technologies?
Well, it is interesting. And in my book, I go all the way back to 1900. And the reason for that is there's been more technological change since 1900 than the entire history of the world. And so I just went back as far as 1900 to get started. I do have some simple operating ideas when it comes to generations. I do believe they're about 20 years apart. I do a lot of work in the area of education as well. I've studied a lot of developmental psychology. And what we tend to see is that there's a phase of life is about 20 years. So from birth to about 20 years, we call that youth. And from 20 to 40, that's young adulthood. And 40 to 60, that's middle adulthood. And of course, elderhood after that. So about every 20 years, we have a phase of life. And in general, you tend to see these generations popping about every 20 years. But what's really interesting and what got me captured in this is that when I started going back and looking at technology, particularly those technologies that have communication aspects to them, they were popping about every 10 years. So in my book, what I offer and propose is that we're not part of one generation. We're actually part of two technological generations. And this whole idea of coming of age also figures in here. We come of age between the ages of 10 and 25, the classic puberty years. And when you mold that in, so it has a very developmental aspect as well as a generational aspect, as well as a technological aspect, you start to see people coming of age, and about their 10th birthday, there is a technology that's starting to pop. So between 1900 and 1920, that was the transportation and telephone technologies that were popping at that point. Everything from automobiles to airplanes to motorcycles. But when you get into the 1930s to 1950s, that is the vinyl record was starting to pop at that point. And all the way through television. And again, each and every one of these generations, there's something that's popping about every 10 years. And I can go into that more in depth, but that's kind of in general what we see. And as far as your question goes, the technology that's popping tends to give us different ways of relating to one another. For example, older generations tend to be more, in fact, today I had a conversation and they wanted to have a phone conversation. And they were an older generation, whereas younger generations, it's more Snapchat or instant message or text of some sort because they have a different technology that was more cyber, more digital in perspective.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So the thing that stays the same is that people want to talk to each other or connect or communicate with each other, not necessarily talk. So that seems to be a consistent thread across some of these tech platforms. How do you think it shapes people's view of the world?
Well, again, if you look at these from a communication standpoint and the windows that they provide, I find it fascinating that when I went back and started studying the history, that the first thing that really kind of pops with any type of new technology is there's a fear factor that's involved. People were as afraid of the telephone and the television they had a lot of fear with that as well. Radio, there was a lot of fear. The idea of demons, possibly, the religious sort, we're seeing demons, talking through the radio. They didn't understand it. And we see the same thing today as, I start talking in my last chapter about the robotics generation and the hair technologies, the holograms, artificial intelligence and robotics, HAIR. And in that chapter, I get a general response of this is really creepy stuff. And it's even fearful technology. We're saying the same thing about robotics and artificial intelligence and holograms that, our grandfathers and great-grandfathers and grandmothers were talking about the radio or television or even the telephone.
Okay, so there's a fear response about how this is going to change us as humans, or even that it appears a little bit magical. I think I can't remember who the quote is, but, technology often looks like magic until you understand its depths. I think that's the quote, or maybe I'm paraphrasing really badly. In any case, I think it's fascinating that we're sort of on the robotics age, as you call it. I'm curious if you've contemplated the emerging metaverse thing and whether that's incorporated in your HAIR acronym there and how that might affect how people interact and communicate.
Well, to make sure, one of the things I talk about when we deal with these type of things, I call it talking tech, and it's another acronym. And sometimes we need to translate to make sure we understand where we're at on the same page as far as our communication. Sometimes we need to elaborate. We need to explain further. Sometimes we need to collaborate. We need to work together. And sometimes we need to habituate, which means we need to bring somebody right onto our page. Really, there's lines already drawn of where we need to be. So in answer to your question, help me out. You talked about the metaverse here. Maybe translate that a little bit for me and elaborate what you mean so I can be on the same page with you.
Oh, okay. So my understanding of the metaverse is sometimes it's augmented reality, sometimes it's virtual reality. It's kind of a gaming environment where you appear as your own avatar and you have real-time interactions with other people with their avatars. And it's a whole different world where some of the transactions are similar and accentuated as in the actual physical world. And you can create commerce there, you can have adventures there. It's a whole new fantasy-like world where you interact with other humans. That's my understanding of the metaverse.
Yeah, and it's actually not all that new. When I was working on my doctorate, I ran across something called Second Life. This was back in the mid-2000s, and Second Life was one of the first ones that was in that area, I think, kind of the defining or the platform to start with. Yeah, these type of the idea that you can augment yourself, create avatars for yourself. The metaverse perspective is certainly a huge part of definitely a digital culture. Younger people obviously find that very attractive, and I think it's partly because of the transparency that they have in the real world. If you notice, in the real world, we're very transparent. So there's kind of a nice idea about maybe finding a cyber self where you can be more hidden, you can be more secretive even in your perspectives. But the danger of living in a cyber culture like we're in right now is that there really are no secrets, So that metaverse then becomes a place of, or really a haven, if you will, for us to wear a mask and to be somebody that we're not, What do you think? I'm kind of curious what you think on that. To me, it's a fascinating conversation we could have on this part.
Absolutely. Well, I hadn't ever thought about the paradox, or maybe it's an irony, where technology has made everything so transparent. Your lives are up on social media. There's no hiding, and that the metaverse could be a place to hide and get some privacy back. That's a new thought for me. I think that's pretty fascinating. So what is the attraction? How is it an exchange? Well, I think I don't have a fear response. I have a curiosity response to these technologies and in particular to the metaverse. I think it's going to be an interesting opportunity for people to explore aspects of themselves and that they can experiment in a way they can't necessarily experiment on other platforms, as you say, because of transparency issues or because of the limitations of actual reality. And I think there's opportunity there for people to accelerate their personal growth, their leadership maturity, because they can fast track their experimentation without sometimes the real life consequences that you would have. So say, for example, right? This is me extrapolating now, taking this argument or this imagination to the next level. There are some virtual reality exercises that organizations have set up already where you can have a scenario in management training where you go into a room and you facilitate a conversation or you have a difficult conversation, then you get feedback afterwards. And it's with avatars or with humans playing avatars or with artificial intelligence characters. And so you can have a practice at having the difficult conversations without actually having to do it live first with humans and risk it all blowing up. So I think there's an educational opportunity in that. And I think if we design different aspects of the metaverse places well, we can actually encourage people to really challenge their thinking, their beliefs, their worldviews in rapid pace fire. It's actually one of the ideas I explore in my book that's coming out which is a novel, a science fiction, near-future science fiction novel, where virtual reality is used as a training mechanism to help people advance their emotional intelligence. And I think that's one of the real opportunities in the metaverse. And of course, there's risks. There's risks that it could go the other way and that it can increase some of the tensions that we see as humans, where biases get amplified, racism gets amplified, nationalism gets amplified. I have less of fear of that. I think it's going to be the reverse. I think there's going to be the multiplicity and exploration of difference is going to be one of the hallmarks of the metaverse. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you brought up the idea of curiosity, because that's the other approach to all these technologies as you look at them. Is there is an element, we call them first adopters in some ways when it comes to some of this technology. They're the ones that are very curious about the technology. They're willing to go out and spend the money on it to get there and to have all the bugs worked out on their watch, you might say. And I think there's about 10% of the culture of any culture that's, it's almost like a bell curve here, where 10% are very fearful of a new technology, 10% are very curious, and it's the 80% in the middle that are going to drift one way or the other, depending on where that technology takes us. There is some technology that has moral implications. As you were talking, I was thinking about another technology that's emerged in the last few years called Replica. Have you heard of Replica?
No.
It's where you can actually create a second, you can record all your memories, you can record all your preferences, all your hobbies, everything, and literally when you go away, the whole idea is that you could physically go away and then someone can contact your replica and have a conversation with you, by text. They only have it by text right now. So you could text in, where do you want to go on vacation this year? And your replica self would basically mirror what your preferences are. The scary part about this, and the part that has some people unnerved, is that it's also being seen as maybe a death type of memory. We literally could take eventually all the memories of a person, all the preferences, and extrapolate them and put them into some sort of a digital box, if you will, that would allow a person to be replicated maybe through a robot down the road, where, you could actually bring a person back. They would look literally like the person, but they would be an artificially intelligent robot or a humanoid. But they would have all the memories of that person. They would have all the experiences. They would have all the preferences. So that person physically, humanly has died, but their humanoid self is back. That's deep type of future we're talking here. But, everything happens in moderation. Everything happens in small steps. And so Replica is kind of that first step towards that future self that could possibly be captured for even nefarious reasons, that could be used.
I don't like to think about the nefarious reasons. I like to think about the positive ones.
I mean, think about what if you were someone who was a very evil person and you could create your own second self or your own replica self so that after you died, you could still create chaos here on Earth. Those are the ones that, when you start talking about some of these moral implications, ethical considerations, that's where it becomes, some of the technology that we're looking at today, especially in the bioethical area, becomes concerning.
On that particular point, where, people who are evil or sociopaths, my hopeful self saying, well, sociopaths are interested in control. So delegating control to a second self is loss of control. So maybe they won't go for it. I don't know.
It's hard to yeah, right.
It's hard to tell.
And we can only hope.
That's right. Sure. We can only hope. But it does, I think we need to explore that. It's a risk. And how do we manage that? I have heard of whether it's Replica. It might have been Replica. I'm not sure. But I did hear Peter Diamandis and Dan Sullivan talk about this idea of capturing not quite memories, but writings and speeches of prolific intellectual leaders. And they cited Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins has such a massive volume of things that he's said and written, etc., that you could put that into a giant database and create an artificial intelligence on that so that you could have the Tony Robbins avatar as your personal coach. So, you dial up Tony and you say, Tony, I've got this issue. And everything that Tony has ever said or taught is compiled into this entity, and they could basically coach you. And that's sort of an application of replica, I think. And so all the great teachers could be compiled. So you could take all the teachings of Jesus Christ, of Moses, of Muhammad. So all the great religious teachers you could have in their own avatars. You could also have some of the other great Buddhist teachings. Everything could be put in there. And so you could be talking to the Dalai Lama about a particular issue. And I think that's an interesting thought bubble as well, where it's like, let's say you've got a challenge, let's say a workplace challenge. It's like, let's get some advice. So you dial up Tony, you have a conversation with Tony Robbins about this, and then you go, well, I want a different perspective. So I'm going to talk to the Dalai Lama next, or I'm going to talk to Mother Teresa. And you have all these replica artificial intelligence.
Or Zoe. Let's talk to Zoe. Zoe
right.
probably has a lot of good stuff for it.
Zoe Routh. Let's dial up Zoe Routh and have a chat to her and see what she'd say. And I think that is a really interesting application of this idea of a replica. Actually, one of the things you mentioned is like you put your memories into this thing. When you say memories, it's not like downloading from your brain. Is it a description of your experiences, or how do you capture the memory part of this?
Right now, it's done totally by physical inputting of a memory. You know, it's like, think of it as journaling, and then you put it into this digital, artificially intelligent world, which is able to eventually understand all that information and be able to kick it back to you in real time. However, down the road, the long view of this technology is that when a person dies, that they probably would have maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes is the thought, that you'd be able to actually download their brain. We'd have the capacity to download the brain, which would capture all those memories, all those preferences, all those dispositions and such, even right down to personality could all be captured. But again, we're talking deep future at this point, you know, but the way things have changed in the last 120 years, who knows what the next 100 years brings, you know?
That's right. And it was Frank Herbert wrote about this in Dune, similar concept where the Bene Gesserit witches, the Bene Gesserit witches practitioners, when they were all female leaders, they had this process of being able to share your memories as you were dying with a sister. So they put their foreheads together and they transfer it that way. So they had all these ESP, extra cognition abilities. So they weren't using tech; they were using advanced training, I guess, to get that telepathic communication. And they also used metaphysical and also spice enhanced. So spice was a currency in the Dune universe, which enhanced cognitive and spiritual abilities. So, geez, that was I guess we can't talk about tech in the future without talking about sci-fi. It is completely related. So let's bring this back to leadership. I'm finding this absolutely fascinating. I love exploring these potentialities of all this stuff. Right. So coming back to pragmatics here and now, we've got technology and the opportunities and challenges we've had through COVID. So brass tacks, people got teams working in offices, out of offices, from home, etc. What do you see are the leadership opportunities in using the technology to bring people together and work collaboratively together? Yeah.
I was just having a conversation with somebody the other day about this, because in my world, we were actually talking in the church world. There's been a huge disruption, COVID has, as far as people not coming back to church. And in the States, it's down as much as 30, 40, even 50%, depending on the churches, that have not come back. And trying to analyze that and understand it. And our conversation kind of went two ways, because when you think about what is the purpose, and so when you think about leadership, when you get your people together, what is your purpose for getting them together? Is it for relationship, or is it for information? If it's just for information, this type of strategy right here works. You can communicate very easily, much more faster information through a Zoom or through email or through texting or however other strategy you want to use to communicate. If, however, you're trying to develop relationship, you're trying to get people to come together, to collaborate, that's a little bit harder within a digital cyber world. That's not impossible. Obviously, you and I could collaborate on something here, but it'd be a whole lot more beneficial if we were in the same room and we had everything laid out and it's just a different type of work. So I think as leaders, we have to look at the technology, at least the technology we have on the plate right now, as helpful, but we have to know what is our purpose. What are we trying to do here with our teams, with our staff? in my case, I deal with a lot of volunteers. If I'm just trying to train them and communicate basic logistics of the job that we do, why bring them into a room to do that? You could do that through a video training. You could do that through even a live Zoom. There are so many other ways that could be handled.
That's interesting that you mentioned the church, though. So with that question, what are you trying to do? Give them information or give them relationship? So my understanding, because I'm not a churchgoer, I don't have a religion, though I have been to many church services through the course of relationships with people and family and so on, is that church is a place of connection. And it's to understand the teachings and the sermon and the experience, but it is an experience to be amongst other humans united around a particular faith practice. So what is the answer for the church community around that?
Well, the problem in the United States is that the last really 40 years, we've moved from a model that was very communal model, to more of a performance-driven model, a stage show, if you will. If you go to the average, at least in the what we commonly call an evangelical type of church, if you're talking Catholic church, it's still much more experiential. We might call it old school in a way. But if you go to the average, even mainline church, Methodist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, some of those, but any of the evangelical churches, you tend to go in, sit down. It's often designed very much like an auditorium, and you watch a stage show. You watch some people sing songs. You may sing along with them, and then you listen to one person get up and give you a message, as you said. And then we throw a few bucks in the offering plate and leave. I mean, there's very little community today. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of churches found it very easy to take their services and go online with them during COVID because, hey, just put a camera up and let's go. And, because that's basically what you do. You go and you sit and watch something happening on a camera. I find it fascinating. And I was doing this even before COVID. This has been years and years and years. I've seen this phenomena happening. But, a lot of these larger churches, I go to church or used to attend a church here locally of about 2,000 people. And if you watch the people in the chairs, they weren't even looking at the stage. They were all watching the big screens on either side of the stage. We've become a screen culture. And so it wasn't that hard during COVID then to move to a screen culture. And I think it's the same thing in leadership and in business and organizational matters during COVID. It was very easy to move our people to screens because we've become comfortable with screens. We work in front of screens all the time. But is that the purpose? Obviously the church is different than a business. A business is about commerce. It's about selling something. It's about, delivering a goods or a service. The church itself, from a biblical perspective, is about community. It's about gathering as friends and as family and learning in that context, worshiping in that context, serving in that context. And it's impossible to do that through a Zoom environment. That's the problem. So churches right now, what happened is they got so married, if you will, to this model of come and watch us stand on stage and give you a show that they're the ones that are struggling. The fastest growing church right now in America is the micro church. It's a church that meets in homes. It doesn't even meet in a building. It meets in homes. It's 20 people, maybe 30 people max, but a lot of them are as small as 8 or 12 people, and they gather every week. I do that. I have a Thursday night life group. We have about 20 people in our life group. We have some people that attend by Zoom in that life group, but it's very, very small. And we operate as much as like a church as you would think of a church operating, but we don't have all the bells and whistles of a steeple or a auditorium or microphones and all that. We just love on people, and we try to teach them a little bit about Jesus along the way.
Rick, I think this is a really exciting insight that has really useful applications from a leadership point of view. I think we in business have gotten lazy thinking about culture. And pre-COVID, culture existed in a physical workspace. And then when we disappeared into our computers at home, we lost that sense of connection. And I think trying to get people to rebuild a sense of connection and community actually takes deliberate intent. And we can't just throw people in a room and expect them to all of a sudden have a sense of connection and community. It needs to be facilitated and harnessed and cultivated, if you like. And I think this is probably the missing imperative that a lot of organizations that is the missing imperative that a lot of organizations have, is that they want people to come back into the office because they think it'll be good for the culture, but they don't facilitate the connection. They don't facilitate the community. And that's exactly what you need to have. And your example of the microchurch is great for that. It's deliberate, it's intentional. Come to a small group. Let's build intimacy. Let's build safety. Let's have powerful conversations about meaning and purpose. That's exactly what we need to do in business. We need to have those kinds of trust-based, intimate conversations about meaning and purpose as it's funneled through the work intention. Okay, that was my most exciting thought for today.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of add on to that, because it's interesting. You can take two cats and you can tie their tails together, and you will have connection, but you will not have community. Two cats with their tails together, there's a connection there, but there's no community. And that's the problem that we have. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, what if businesses did think more like a church or a micro church as far as how they operated, whereas, you've got divisions, you've got departments, you've got different tasks that need to be done, but you need to have everybody in the building to do that. Why not have smaller locations? I mean, a whole department maybe could meet at a coffee shop or meet at a home and do that once a week, and then they work from home the rest of the time, but they come together and then they're part of a broader, bigger vision as far as what the widgets that you're making, whatever you're doing. But I think work has already changed. I know here in the States it's changed mightily because of COVID. And there are a lot of people that, the thought was, well, they're not coming back because they're not comfortable coming back with COVID still being around. Well, COVID's not really that big of an issue anymore. Most people, you very rarely see masks, at least up here where my neck of the woods, you don't see hardly anybody with a mask anymore. We've kind of gotten beyond that. And I think COVID's a bit in the rearview mirror now, and yet people's behaviors haven't changed. You think about how people buy. My wife and I, when we went into COVID, we started moving to having all of our groceries basically delivered to us. That hasn't changed. We continue to have that behavior. We liked it so much. Hey, let's just keep doing it.
Oh, I agree.
Let's just order our groceries. So the last time I was in a grocery store, I just don't go to grocery stores anymore. Unless it's for one item.
You know why? Because it doesn't add value to your life. Going into a grocery store, it's a pain in the bum.
That's it. You just nailed it. It doesn't add value. And I'm going to add one more for the work environment. It doesn't validate. You have to provide value and you have to validate a person in order to produce purpose, in order to produce any type of life within a community there. So it's more than just valuing people. We have to validate them as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think here we are. We've solved the problems of workplace culture and community.
Yeah, we did in 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I guess it's an important thing to think about, though, right? Is like, as a business enterprise, if you're worried about foot traffic into your organization, et cetera, asking the question, how does this add value to people? How does this validate their experience as a human, whether it's for your customer, your client, or for your staff member, indeed for your staff member? This is the new lens through which we need to think about the construction of our workplaces and our work practices. And if leaders start doing that, they're going to be able to navigate the blend of hybrid work, some people from home, et cetera. It's less a technical thing and more of a spiritual, emotional connection piece that we need to navigate. That's the real conversation. It's not the tech platforms.
Yeah. Well, and yet, when you think about customers, Zoe, if you think about customers, their first connection, if you will, with your business, organization, church, if you will, is going to be your website. So there is a technological platform. People search out information now online, and their first connection with you is going to be through your website. So you need to look at your website like your front door. Is it attractive? Is it engaging? Is it interesting? And fortunately, websites have changed a lot, but there's still every now and then, especially in the church world, you can find some pretty bad websites out there.
That's the same across any sort of business sector, I think. Some terrible websites, absolutely. One last question, because I'm conscious that I promised you 30 minutes and we're past it. And I think it fits also with what are we going to do in the workplace. You mentioned that there are 6 deep human needs. And what are those, and how can leaders speak to those or access those in terms of building community?
Yeah, well, this is pretty much my heartbeat message when I work with leaders. I just believe natural motivation is more inspirational than, incentivized type of motivation, where I'll give you this if you do that type of thing. And a lot of how we motivate people tends to be through bribes and gimmicks and gifts and prizes and all that. I would argue that what's really happening, if you think about a human being don't think about from a physiological perspective, our stomach growls when it's hungry. There's a growling that goes on. And so I have 6 needs I developed. Again, I like acronyms because they help me remember. And several years ago, I developed this acronym for the inner needs. And these are the 6 deep human needs. And the first one is grace. You just mentioned the spiritual side of leadership. There is a spiritual side of every human being, I believe. And this idea of grace is where we hunger for unconditional, unbelievable environments where there's blessing, where there's surprise. That's grace. It's not about doing this to get that. It's not about making sure all the check marks are there and then you win. It's about, hey, you know what? We're in this, there's a grace there. And it's messy. I got to tell you that this part of it is pretty messy, and it's one that we don't have time to unpack, unfortunately. But it is the messiest one of them all. The other ones are fairly practical and pragmatic as far as how they work out. The R is relationship. We've been talking about that this entire hour. Deep down, we all long to belong. And if you don't belong, it's so long. We check out, we leave, we retire, or we resign. The O is ownership. So grace is the first one, relationship, and then ownership. Ownership is about empowering people. It's about giving people choice. It's about giving people control. It's about allowing them to contribute to whatever it is that you're doing. And then the W is worth, and we've been talking about that. This is where you find the value of a person. You explore and validate them as human beings and such. In fact, I often say that if you just focus on those 4 needs alone, I call those the power needs: grace, relationship, ownership, and worth. GROW. What's that spell? Grow. That's how you grow a staff. That's how you grow and inspire productivity. It's just focus on grace, relationship, ownership, and worth. The L and the S are the primitive needs. These are primitive needs. These are very deep needs. The L is simply laughter. Deep down, we all want to enjoy what we do. We all want to laugh at our world. We want to laugh with people. We want to enjoy life and our work. In fact, I think when you eventually get to the spot where I am today, I don't work a day in my life. I play all day long. I'm just spending an hour playing with Zoe right now. This is fun for me. The S is security, though. Security. And this is physical security. This is financial security. This is emotional security. Definitely in your businesses, you've got to make sure that your employees feel financially secure. And that's kind of the starting spot for where you go. But I got to tell you, if you just deal with the primitive needs, if you just make your employees feel safe and secure and then have a little fun, you're on your way. I mean, that's a good starting spot. But in the end, if you can scratch all of those human needs, grace, relationship, ownership, worth, laughter, and security, you will highly motivate naturally anyone, anywhere, anytime. I guarantee it.
It sounds like a great place to be, I reckon, if you have grace, relationship, ownership, worth, laughter, and security. That sounds like my kind of place. Rick, thank you so much. This was extraordinary. I really had fun during this conversation. I had wonderful insights. Can you tell us where people can find more about your book and a little bit more about you?
Yes, I'd love to invite you into my journey. You can get a hold of me at rickchromey.com. And also the book is available there too. Unfortunately, I don't mail the book internationally, but what I'll do is you can pick it up digitally through Amazon and through other places. And perhaps they do mail internationally, but I don't mail. But if you buy through me, what I'll do is I will send you a digital version instead of a paper version.
Okay. And the title of your book, the full title of your book is?
The book is called Gen Tech. Gentech, an American story. It is written through the American lens of our technology and our culture today, but it's an American story of technology change and who we really are. And it's a fun book. It goes all the way back to 1900 and goes into the future all the way to 2055. So it's a fun ride.
Excellent. Well, I was really excited to see your different perspective on generational evolution and technologies, and I look forward to reading and copying the book too. Rick, thank you so much. This has been extraordinary.
Thank you, Zoe. Appreciate the opportunity.
That was such a fun interview, and I have to say I learned quite a lot in that one. I really enjoyed Rick's recategorizing of what generations are based on the interface of technology and how it shapes and changes how we communicate and connect with one another. I think that was a really powerful way and useful way to look at generations and to get us to ask insights about what does this mean in terms of how we communicate and connect, what are the opportunities, what are the risks. I think there is a huge amount of opportunity in the metaverse and those kinds of platforms for people to explore who they are, how they interact, and how they can make contributions in the world. And I think that's something that we should all, as leaders, lean into quite a bit more. Central to the takeaways for me, I think, from a team development point of view, are asking the questions of how does this experience add value and, as Rick suggested, validate the humans that we are wanting to bring to the table, whether it's our customers or whether it's our staff or whether it's community members. And I think this idea of how do we build connection, how do we build community in our workplaces, in our teams, with our customers, is a really fabulous way of looking at the purpose of our work and whatever we decide in terms of meetings and whatever technology platforms that we implement. And I love also Rick's analysis of the different 6 human needs, and it's particularly valuable from a community point of view. Grace, relationship, ownership, worth, laughter, and security. Those are just excellent feel-good words, and I think if we have that in place in our workplaces, we're doing really well. So if you enjoyed the show, please share this episode with others you think would get value from it as well. Feel free to rate and review the podcast. It actually does encourage other people to listen and to expand their worldview and leadership practice. And if you're ready to take the next step and grow your leadership practice, do consider joining us in Amplifiers. We are building community. We are building connection. We are building a place where we hope to create value and validate the leaders that are there, so that you can go back out into your world where you are the leader, and you can do that for the people that you serve as well. So check us out at zoerouth.com. Click on programs, click on amplifiers, and we'd love to hear more about you and work with you. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.